Hey all, this is Devin, the romantic traveler back again. You know, each week I shoot for 12 noon to go live, and not just yet. I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress. It's about 12:18 in 2 seconds, so I'm closing in on it. Progress, here we come. And so I am. There's a couple things going on. There's going to be well. It's really not an announcement. We have our first group for the Mystical Solutions for Modern Love. That's happening now, and so I'm very excited about that. That's going to be starting tomorrow. Also, I'm going to share a little bit about my experience of in around Iceland, which was a significant turning point in my life. But first, we're going to talk about this week's question, which comes to us from Anna, who writes, does it happen often in a relationship that when you are in fear but unconscious of this fear, your partner acts out his own fear as if to awaken you to your underlying problem? But if you are not very aware, you get drawn into his fears, which results in causing even bigger problems within the relationship. How do you stay conscious all the time? Because in a relationship, we tend to become relaxed and easygoing. Thank you so much, Anna. That was a lot of words, but it's a hard question, actually. I think what relationships ideally are about being of service to the other person. I think we do that consciously and unconsciously. When we do it consciously, it's about love being an act of service. That means we help support them and do what they want. We theoretically do it with love in our hearts, that they get what they want, whether it serves us particularly or not. That's the goal. But the point is that relationships ultimately are sort of a mirror to each other. Like, I can tell you that the things that I see in my lovely, lovely wife that may get under my skin or I have a feeling about, more often than not, has much, much more to do with my reaction to her stuff than it actually does with anything. So to specifically answer your question, yes, I think all of the above. I think that somebody else's fear is a mirror to ourselves, and sometimes we see that fear as like, oh, here's a good lesson that I don't want to have to replicate in my own life or do this to my partner. At the same time, if I'm unknowing of it, yes, does it create a cycle of potentially bigger and bigger problems? Yes. So the goal is that a Kabbalistic principle has to do with the idea of restriction, limitation, meaning that you kind of pull back from your reactions to take conscious, proactive positions on all of your stuff. To reword that in a better way, and I'm hoping I'm going to say it in a better way now, is that when somebody does something to us that we don't like, really the goal is to try to learn from it and try to react to it less in sort of a reactive, like, oop, hot flame, pull my hand back, really much more about how do I stay conscious and be of service to that moment. Our best opportunities for those kinds of moments are in our one-to-one personal relationships, but they're really valuable across the board. So anyway, Anna, thank you so much for that great question. I love it. Anyway, so to turn to Iceland. The reason why I want to talk about Iceland is because it's had such a large impact on me. It was at a time when my life was a little bit of a mess, and I followed sort of my heart. I don't even remember what I had read. It might have even been this very small conversation that became much bigger. But all of a sudden, Iceland as a place popped into my head, and I couldn't tell you at the time why it did. And it became like all of a sudden I found myself reading guidebooks and trying to learn about the country. And there's a lot of interesting things to learn about it. At the time, I don't know if this is still true, that 90% of the country believed in the elves and gnomes that and the Hilde folk that sort of populated the countryside that were invisible. And it leads to lots of interesting stories. But the long story short is that against my better judgment, against all of the things that sort of made sense, like I didn't need to be leaving town, like I really didn't have enough money. I mean, like I had exactly the amount of money that I thought that I needed to travel, and I really didn't know anybody. And so what had happened was I didn't have really a really good reason to go, but I started telling people, and it just kind of happened that I was going to go to Iceland in order to scream naked on a fjord. I eventually did. Not my best choice in the world, but I did that. But before I left, I was really looking for some sort of a meaning of why am I attracted to Iceland? Why do I need to go? But I ended up going. I think about 170 Iceland people, and this is close to 20 years ago. So when I wrote them, I was looking for .is extensions on the end of emails, and I just looked for blogs and bloggers and anybody I could find that had this .is extension. So I mailed them all the same letter, which was, "Hi, my name is Devin. I'm coming to your country, and I really don't know why, but I'm very excited about it. And I really don't want anything in particular, but if you can, please let me know what's your favorite restaurant. Is there a great park I should go to? Is there a great show or a great old house or some particular architecture or a city?" And I made a pretty thorough list. And at the end of it, I said, "If you don't have really any suggestions for me at all, please wish me good luck, because it would mean a great deal to me. And I'm really looking forward to visiting your country." And I sent it off hopeful, and I got one response. I got one response from all 170 emails. And it was from a woman who was like a blogger and a poet, and she did a whole bunch of interesting, fun things. And so long story short, I showed up in Iceland. I had a spectacular time, and I eventually met with this nice woman, and we kind of remained in contact. And one of the things, and this is where it becomes sort of like, I think, intriguing and more important, is that we kept in contact, and at the bottom of all of her emails, we'd write each other once every few months or something like that. At the bottom of all of her emails, she'd give me a list of all these URLs to all of these really incredible projects that she was doing. And she was one of these people that goes out and kicks butt. Like I'm putting out a record, and 3 months later, "Oh, here's my record. Oh, I'm writing a new book of sonnets. Oh, here's my book of sonnets." Like, she would have a vision and she would just do it. And at that time in my life, I was probably the opposite of that. And so I had no URLs. I barely understood what a URL was at the time. I remember writing this short story, and I wasn't blown away by it, but it was a short story and I had nothing else. So after being tired enough of receiving all of her successes and all of her plans and all of her wonderful things, I sent her this short story, just sort of like, as well, I'm doing something important too. So I sent her this important story, and she wrote back and she said, "Hey, didn't you see my link, the third one from the bottom? We're putting together this book of poetry." And at the time, it was sort of for kind of a world healing book. I think that was the exact title, that promoted love and harmony in the world, because we were at war and the world was sort of a scary place for a period of time, and they were putting together something. So she wrote and she goes, "Hey, listen, why don't you write another little story, send it to me, and I'll make sure it gets read. I mean, the due date's passed, but if you send it in 4 days, I will at least make sure that it gets considered." And so I sent that short story in at the very last second on that Thursday, 4 days later, and I didn't hear back. And then 5 months later, I heard from an Italian publisher who said, "You're on page 53 and the Dalai Lama's on page 85," or some other number. But the point was, this was one of the greatest highs of all time. Up to that point in time in my life, I had assumed that I was really not a writer. I had no creative spirit. I wasn't going anywhere with that. And so I learned, I took a lot of woodshop classes. Um, and so it was sort of like a really amazing point. And it was like the euphoria that came with that acceptance letter was a big deal. Now, the book ultimately didn't sell. You've probably never heard of it. I think I probably have two of the extant copies of that book, in my living room. But the lesson wasn't lost, is that following sort of my almost compulsive desire to see Iceland had kind of, unbeknownst to anybody involved at the time, changed my life. I mean, I've gone on to have 2 degrees in writing, and I take my writing and service very, very seriously. And it's in part to meeting this kind of happenstance thing of randomly writing this woman that I didn't know and getting a response and being inspired by her actions. The ironic thing is that woman now is part of Icelandic parliament. And she has done some incredibly notable, interesting, powerful things with her life. And I still look up to her as an incredible role model. And on top of it, a very, very nice woman that I was proud to bring a store-bought rhubarb pie that I showed up at her door in Reykjavik all those years ago. So thank you, Birgitta, if you're watching in the outside chance. And I'm hoping that this story gives you a little bit of inspiration and insight to who I am. And I will look forward to coming at you again next week, a little bit closer to 12 noon. And more importantly, I think we're going to try this live. That means I'm going to try inviting you to come visit and maybe ask questions or interact or tell me a story. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. And this is, I guess, episode 3 of The Romantic Traveler. And hope to see you soon. Can't wait for next week. Bye.